Today we are benchmarking Modern Warfare Warzone. We are playing on a Ryzen 9 5950X at stock. We're playing on an RTX Trinity OC at stock. Kind of performs just like the Founders Edition, give or take a few percent. We are using 32 gig of DDR4 CL16 3600 MHz RAM. That's kind of the main juice. Now, benchmarking a Battle Royale game is kind of awkward because every run is different. So if you're just wanting to skip ahead to the numbers and have a look at the gameplay yourself, that's fine. Please go ahead and do so. There'll be some links on the time bar. Before you do that, leave a like and a comment. Let me know what you think. If there's anything else you want benchmarking or you've enjoyed it, consider subscribing and checking out the links in the description. So, because every run's different on a Battle Royale, I tried to make it pretty consistent. So I kind of made a little route to perform each time. So I would mark the map at a certain point, jump out at a certain point, run past a certain building, grab a gun, and I followed this little route I created, and give or take some variance because obviously people were shooting at me. You know, within variance, the runs are the same. Then you've got part variance. My 3080 might perform better than yours. It might perform worse. My processor might perform better or worse. But all of these things are just to give you, the consumer, a rough idea of what to expect. I think these benchmarks get way too technical when I've personally watched them, and that's why I've started to do a couple of them, because they get baffling with all the numbers, and kind of all I want to see is, am I going to get like my monitor's refresh rate if I maybe play at max and turn down a few settings, or is it going to be a stuttery mess and I might have to get a more expensive card, or is it way overkill for what I need and I can purchase a cheaper card? And that's what I'm going to go for. So let's jump into some numbers. Let's have a chat. The footage you're seeing right now is 1080p lowest. Now, bear in mind, I have no idea why on earth you would buy this level of computer to play at 1080p lowest. But what is a good sign about this game, unlike other games that I have played, is it actually still uses a lot of your GPU. It's not quite 100%, 99% pinned, but it's not the 30-40% that we just saw in Dota. So actually, if you do buy a really expensive graphics card and you are looking to push high refresh rates, this is still using your graphics card and processor pretty well. It's a very well optimized game. I definitely will say that about Warzone. Now you can see the run I'm doing. I've landed. I kind of check these two buildings. Sometimes I get shot by a guy and then I book it into this green building and then I go over the ramp and so on and so forth. The actual level of performance you can see in the bottom left, that's the minimum frame rate. Now the minimum sometimes does bug out in some of these benchmarks just because when you're loading into the plane, it randomly tanked to like 60. So if you do see a super low minimum, you can maybe discount that. But generally, your minimums are kind of accurate if you just watch the footage yourself. You're going to be seeing that I've peaked at 313 FPS. I maintain an average of a 266, and that's going to change throughout the game, and I'll show you at the end what it sort of ended up on. But this is the level of performance you're going to expect on 1080p, everything low. You're going to be pushing basically that, quote, NVIDIA Reflex 300 Hz monitor, 300 FPS, what you're looking for. Now, you're kind of in a bit of a pickle because if you're playing on 1080p with everything low, you aren't really getting the visuals to actually pick people out and see them. So it is a bit of a kind of pie in the sky thing. Yes, you can put everything on low and basically get, 300 Hz gameplay, but you can't really see what's going on at this kind of graphics, like not for me anyway with my eyesight. So you probably would tweak a few settings, get some texture resolution up, get a bit of sharpness back, and you're probably going to be playing it around the 230 area of FPS with the 1080p half decent settings. Then you're really pushing that competitive frame rate. Minimum's 165 pretty much, and the actual top end was above 300. So very strong performance. If we move on to 1080p with everything maxed out but no ray tracing, you're going to see kind of similar results. The average frame rate at the end was coming in at 205. The maximum was 265 and the minimum was 140. So you're probably losing 40 odd FPS on the top end, 40 odd FPS on the average, you know, 25 kind of off the minimum. Again, give or takes, you know, variance. This is probably a very good level that you would go for if you're a competitive player. 1080p max, turn off ray tracing. You could also turn off ambient occlusion, because I've got everything cranked up there as well, and I think that's probably the setting you'd go for if you're like making money off playing this game and you want the top end stuff. This would be a very viable thing. If we move into 1080p, everything maxed, super graphics mode out of your mind, it's actually still running pretty well. Just trust me on this one. You're basically maintaining about 180 FPS here, but weirdly, well, not really weirdly, with a 3080 and with the level of optimization that you've got, the ray tracing doesn't impact the game really at all, which is very surprising through testing. Yes, it knocks off a little bit, but it doesn't feel jarring in any way. It doesn't feel unsmooth, and it's still very, very high refresh rates. If you're playing 1080p, everything maxed, ray tracing included, and you've got a 165Hz monitor, you're going to have an absolute blast with this game. As we turn up the settings on our resolution, and we move to 1440p, we go to 1440p low, you'll be able to see the visuals are a bit stronger here, but you're still getting that pop-in, you're still getting that kind of weird distancy error kind of when you're on everything low. Again, I wouldn't recommend playing everything low. I'd recommend me turning off all the lighting settings if you're super competitive, but you can crank your textures up, you can crank your view distance up and that kind of stuff, and it doesn't really affect it. But if you're wanting to know the figures, then with everything on its lowest, we were coming in at a 276 frame rate maximum, 217 frame rate average, and a minimum of 118. Coming into 1440p, everything maxed out with no ray tracing. This, again, very, very strong performance. Coming in at 208 maximum, 165 FPS average, and minimum of, I believe, if my bad eyesight can pick it up, 98. The game doesn't, as well to note, in no scenario does it tank down. So when it says a minimum of 90 or an average of so and forth and so, it doesn't tank down. It's not a jarring experience. Some games you'll look at a benchmark and the numbers look pretty good, pretty similar, but they're jumpy. This isn't jumpy at all. So on the 1440p no ray tracing setting, you're coming in at a average of 165. So if you're like me, you have a 1440p monitor and you don't want to put ray tracing on and you just want to lock your frame rate perfectly out, this is like perfect card for it. Now if we go to full maximum, ray trace enabled as well, it's a pretty similar story, frankly. The level of performance was pretty much identical, about 10 to 15 frames coming off your sort of average and maximum. Ray tracing really doesn't tank it down. Again, I am apologizing that the recording didn't pick up the minimums and average. You're just going to have to trust me. I ran this. I'm not making it up. Ray tracing isn't very impactful on this game. It does lower your FPS, but it's, you know, we're in ray tracing generation 2. It's not taking off 50%, and a 3080 has a ton of power. So I personally was very happy to play this game completely maxed at 1440p, and there was no issues. You can actually see, if you want, at the end, I've re-recorded a section, and you can see the full game with the minimums and average with ray tracing on in 1440p, just to make sure I'm telling the truth. As we move into 4K, and we go 4K low, obviously 4K low doesn't look nearly as bad, just because there's that sharpness coming in from 4K. But again, you're not going to play Modern Warfare on 4K low with these settings. You would go 1440p maxed or 4K ultra textures and lighting off, so we'll get into that. But if you're for some reason wanting to play 4K everything lowest, again, your frame rate maximum 179, your minimum frame rate was 67. I'm going to call that a bug. It was probably about an 80% 80 FPS minimum. It just tanked when the benchmark loaded up. And the frame rate average is 150. So 4K low, you're still fast refresh rate 150 average. If we move to 4K with no ray tracing but everything else maxed out, which is a more realistic sort of benchmark, you're actually going to be seeing 141 as its peak frame rate, 103 FPS average, and a minimum of 57. This 57 again came inside of the plane, not through actual gameplay. It's probably again around the 70-80 region for the minimum. But if you've got everything turned on at 4K, but you don't have ray tracing on, you're playing at 100 FPS plus. And remember, you're going to get more in some areas and a little bit less in others. But on average, 100 FPS, a very, very nice experience, especially for that level of fidelity. If you want to go the full hog and go full 4K maxed out ray tracing everything, the experience was a little bit sort of less high refresh rate. There was a minimum here of 65 again inside of the plane. From actual gameplay, it never went below that. And it was, I would say, about a 90 FPS average experience. Honestly, it wasn't pushing 130s, 140s really at any point. It was peaking maybe at 120 in a very specific area. But yeah, it's more of a, if you're doing 4K maxed with ray tracing, I would say 60 hertz monitor perfect. But you're still getting way above that. But you could comfortably, I would say, do 4K maxed out ray tracing, 60 FPS, 60 hertz locked, and have a smooth experience. It's not like 4K 60 is sluggish or unplayable. Yes, I wouldn't say it's quote competitive, but you're still going to have a good time. It's not like you couldn't win a game of Warzone at 60 hertz, 60 FPS locked, is it? So a very, very comfortable card, and I think this game very well optimized and really stretched his legs. Hopefully that helped. If you're interested now in some just raw footage, the raw footage you're going to see is a full game of ray tracing maxed out 1440p, so you can have a look for yourself, because I know benchmarks, they help a little bit, but sometimes you just kind of want to look at the footage and go, well, what does it look like, mate? Can I see it for myself? Because it's okay seeing an average and minimum, but it's better to look at it yourself. So here's some gameplay. Again, leave a like, leave a comment, consider subscribing. Let me know if there's anything specific you want to test, but the RTX 3080 and the 5950X definitely perform fantastic. For me, I'm 1440p, maxed out 165 FPS. It's perfect. And as well, you're losing a few percentage from recording, so take that into account.
Enemy dropping into the AO. Hostile dropping into the area. Watch the skies. Hostile dropping into the area. Watch the skies. Battle Royale. Gas is closing on your position. Suggest you get moving. That's our drop zone. Get ready.
Moving.
Hostile dropping into the area. Watch the skies. Enemy UAV overhead.
Vendor here if you need equipment. Vendor here if you need equipment.
Loadout drop inbound. Gas is inbound. Marking new safe zone. Welcome to the Gulag. If you survive, you earn your freedom. Time for a bit of argy-bargy. Get ready to fight. You're next. Win here and you return to the front line. You lose, your fight is over. Time to earn your freedom, soldier. Stand by for redeployment. Gas is moving. Learn from the loss. Failure's a proper teacher.